Hi, my name is Bob Chorley, or Baselight Bob as some of you know me. In this set of tutorials, I'll be covering the operation of Daylight, our comprehensive dailies grading and management system. In the first 5 videos, I will give you a brief overview of the system by running through an example of a typical workflow, from importing source media, editing metadata, applying basic grades and looks, syncing audio, and outputting files and reports to be used by editorial and at other places in the post-production pipeline. In the rest of the series, I will go into specific operations in a lot more detail. You can also learn about some of the more advanced features in the Daylight User Guide, which can be downloaded from our website and is also available within the application itself. Okay, so let's get started. I'm running Daylight on a typical system consisting of a Mac Pro with a single 24-inch monitor for my main UI display. I also have a T-Tap Thunderbolt interface providing an SDI output for my image monitoring display, which in my case happens to be an OLED monitor, but your system may be using a different type of reference display. It's worth pointing out that if you plan to do any color grading or critical evaluation of the look of your images, then you should use an appropriate professional display which has been calibrated to a known standard, such as Rec 709 or P3. It should also be viewed in a suitable environment, so there are no reflections on the screen and the ambient lighting conditions do not adversely affect the way you perceive the images on the display. If you're syncing audio, then you will also need to have an appropriate audio monitoring system. Okay, so the application has now started up, but before I create a new job, I'm going to check the setup of the system to make sure that the hardware is configured correctly. Clicking on the Daylight Setups option brings up a list of the different setups available for this system. The current setup has a tick by its name. In this case, we're using the HD 25p 422 setup. This will provide default settings for a 25 frames per second HD workflow using an external SDI monitor. If I wanted to use a different workflow setup, for example to work at 2K 24p, I would choose the appropriate setup from this list, and then click on the Activate Setup button. Note that in some cases you may need to restart the application so that Daylight can reinitialize the output hardware correctly. Setups can also be modified and new ones created for specific workflows, but I'll cover all that in the tutorial on setting up and configuring the system. For this project, I'll use this HD setup, and I'll now close the Setups view. So this is the screen you will normally see when you first start up Daylight. It consists of the player workspace, which we'll look at in a minute. There is also a floating window, or view as we call it, on top of the workspace. This is the Job Manager, and it will open automatically each time you start Daylight. It can also be opened from the Scene menu or by pressing Command O on the keyboard. The Job Manager provides access to existing jobs as well as enabling the creation of new ones. All Daylight jobs are stored in a database, which is normally hosted on the local machine, but it's also possible to connect to a database on another system, such as another Daylight or a Baselight machine. This allows us to easily open jobs on a remote system. I'm going to now create a new job for this training exercise. If you have a copy of the tutorial footage or some of your own source material, then you can follow along with this example. You create a new job by clicking on the Actions button at the top of the job column, and then selecting New Job from the drop-down menu. Now give the job an appropriate name, but notice that names can only contain lowercase letters, numbers, and a few other characters. Spaces will be turned into underscores. Daylight will warn you if you try to type an invalid character. Now that I've created a new job, I need to create a scene within the job. We use the term scene in Daylight to refer to a particular section of the job we want to work on. A scene contains a collection of shots along with their metadata, audio, grades, and other effects, but they don't have to belong to any particular scene in a script. For example, on a feature film, a daylight scene may contain all the shots from a single day's shoot. It's quite likely that these shots will belong to several different scenes in the script. Okay, I'm going to create a new scene for a set of dailies. I'll call it Shoot Day 7. Note that in scene names you can use upper and lowercase letters as well as spaces. The scene settings here have already been set according to the daylight setup we chose earlier. I don't need to change them because they are correct for my workflow. But if for some reason I wanted to work differently in this scene, I can click on these buttons and choose a different working format, frame rate, or working color space. So now I'll click on the OK button to create this new scene. The green padlock icon in the Job Manager tells us that this scene is now open, and at the right-hand end of the main menu bar we can see details of the current scene, including its working format. I can now close the Job Manager. Now I have a new scene, the next step is to import the footage I want to work with. But before I do that, I'll just give you a quick tour of the user interface. At the top is the main menu bar, providing access to most of the functions within Daylight, although many of these can be accessed from the UI or via buttons on the control surface, and many also have keyboard shortcuts. The top bar also includes some indicators for system performance, quick access to the render queue, and audio monitoring. The current time is shown here, and this is the open scene as I've already mentioned. This button in the corner minimizes the Daylight user interface so you can access items on the desktop or in the Mac's dock. The rest of the screen is made up of the player workspace. This includes the shots view at the top and the play controls below. The shots view is empty at the moment, but once we import footage into this scene, the shots will appear in this area. Metadata for the currently selected shot will be displayed on the right in the Metadata Details panel. Note that the panels can be resized by dragging on the splitter bars which separate them. The content of some panels will scale down, so it doesn't get truncated when the panel is made very small. Okay, so let's import some footage into this scene. To do that, I'm going to open the Sequence browser from the Views menu. The Sequence browser is a media browser which allows us to find and preview material. For this tutorial, all my source footage has been copied onto a single USB drive, which I have plugged into the Mac. All media volumes currently accessible to this machine will appear under the Volumes drop-down menu here. This includes locally attached RAID storage as well as any network shares which are connected. So I will choose my USB drive and then navigate to the directory containing my footage. It contains all the studio and location dailies, audio recordings, and other files such as graphics and reference shots. I want to import all the video files into this scene, so I'll select the Images directory and then the Shoot Date directory. Within here, there are 3 more directories. We can preview the material by selecting individual media files and then pressing the Play button in the Transport Controls area of the Sequence browser. Notice that the metadata for the selected shot is displayed here, and we can also preview the shot with an appropriate color space conversion applied by clicking on this button. In this case, the source material was recorded in ARRI log C color space. We'll come back to color spaces a little later on. As I want to import all the media into this scene, I'll go back and select the parent directory for the whole day's shooting. I now click on the Multi-Insert button. Daylight searches for all the media files within this directory and its subdirectories and summarizes all the resolutions, file types, and tape names that it finds. You can choose to leave out specific resolutions, file types, or tape names by clicking on the appropriate toggle button, The white indicator shows whether or not the button is enabled. You can also filter the list of shots which will be imported according to their file names by adding text into these fields. As I want to include everything, I'll leave these fields empty. Finally, I can choose the order in which the shots will be added to the scene. As each shot is added to the scene, it will be assigned an event number, which can be used as one of the sort options later on. I'm going to choose to order the shots according to their source timecode, as this should assemble the scene in roughly the same order that it was shot, and this will help me to check the footage from the day's shoot. Okay, so let's add all these shots to the scene. The Insert button here is telling us that we will be adding 121 shots to the scene. Note that Daylight refers to them as sequences, as technically speaking, they are sequences of images. I'll click on the button, and now we have to answer this question. Do we want to change the image container? In Daylight, although the project data is all stored in a database, the actual media files reside on disk within a specific source volume or volumes. The scene's container provides a path pointing to the root of the directory containing all the media files in the scene. In most cases, you should change the container to the lowest directory level which will contain all your footage, bearing in mind that additional directories may be added later on. For example, in this case, I know that the footage for this Daylight scene will all come from this day's shooting directory on my USB drive. Setting the container in this way is useful as the media is all accessed via a path relative to the container. If I were to copy this directory onto another drive, I could easily update this scene by simply changing the scene's container, and all the links to my source footage would then reference the files in their new location. Okay, Daylight has now added all the shots to this scene, reading their metadata and adding it to the database. If I close the sequence browser, you can now see that the shots view displays a thumbnail for each shot in the scene, along with its file name. In the next tutorial, I will show you how to play back shots, sort them into a specific order, edit their metadata, and create groups of shots for color grading and other purposes. But before I go any further, I'm going to save this scene. I can do that by choosing Save from the Scene menu, or simply pressing Command S on the keyboard.